The council of the Jews, the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, having rejected Jesus' claim to be the Son of Man, the Messiah, and the Son of God, ignoring all the evidence in support of that claim, they led Jesus to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He answered him and said, "It is as you say." So Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowd, "I find no fault in this man." But they were the more fierce, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place." When Pilate heard of Galilee, he asked if the man were a Galilean, and as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Now when Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him, because he had heard many things about him, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him. Then he questioned him with many words, but Jesus answered him nothing. And the chief priests and scribes stood and vehemently accused him. Then Herod, with the men of war, treated him with contempt, and mocked him, arrayed him in a gorgeous robe, and sent him back to Pilate. That very day Pilate and Herod became friends with each other, for previously they had been at enmity with each other. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, rulers, and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod. For I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him." For it was necessary for him to release one to them at the feast. And they all cried out at once, saying, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas," who had been thrown into prison for a certain rebellion made in the city, and for murder. Pilate, therefore, wishing to release Jesus, again called out to them, but they shouted, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Then he said to them the third time, "Why, what evil has he done? I have found no reason for death in him. I will chastise him and let him go." But they were insistent, demanding with loud voices that he be crucified, and the voices of these men and of the chief priests prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that it should be as they requested. And he released to them the one they requested, who for rebellion and murder had been thrown into prison, but he delivered Jesus to their will. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we've read these verses from Luke 23, verses 1 to 25. There are many details associated with the trial of Jesus before Pilate, and we need to read the four Gospels to get as much information as we can. Luke, primarily writing to a Gentile crowd, didn't give much detail of the Jewish trial, but brings before us the trial of Jesus before Herod that the other writers have omitted. The prime charge that is brought by the chief priests against Jesus is, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ a king." Now, this is a deliberate lie, because just a few days before they had examined Jesus in the temple courtyard concerning this very matter. And Jesus had said, "Pay your taxes, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And so Jesus nowhere forbade the paying of taxes to Caesar. In fact, he commanded that taxes be paid to Caesar. And he had not gone around making a big claim that he was Christ a king. although that claim was justified and his disciples came to recognize it, and the crowds eventually came to recognize it. But it was a recognition based on the qualifications Jesus had, not on his personal claim. He did not go about deliberately. In fact, the account tells us on many occasions he told his disciples and others not to make him known, that he was the Christ. But this was the charge, and this is what Pilate first of all examines him on. And Jesus affirms that which is true. It is as you say. And John relates how Jesus explained the basis of it. He was born to this title. His legal father, Joseph, inherited the title, King of the Jews. But just as his father had not caused any political trouble, so he was not causing any particular trouble. He was not claiming the throne. It was legally his, but he was not raising an army to obtain it. And so he was not a threat to Herod, and he was not a threat to Caesar. But it was true. Legally, he was the King of the Jews. And Pilate recognized that Jesus had not done anything. It was out of envy that the chief priests had handed him over. And so he declares, I find no fault in this man. Well, this is not what they wanted to hear. They wanted Pilate simply to rubber stamp their condemnation. And so they present the evidence. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee to this place. Well, there was an element of truth in this charge. He had been teaching throughout all Judea and in Galilee, and that the people were stirred. There were huge crowds that were following him. But the mention of Galilee, and that Jesus had grown up in Galilee, for he was therefore a Galilean, meant here was a way out. He belonged to Herod's jurisdiction. Let Herod deal with this problem. And Herod, who had had John the Baptist beheaded, had wondered often about this second teacher who was in his kingdom, who had not paid him any respects. If a political leader comes from one country to another, it's polite to come and visit the government and to acknowledge that you're there. But Jesus had not done that with Herod. And so Herod had been intrigued by this person. Of course, he could have gone and seen Jesus himself, but that was not becoming of the king. And so he had heard many things, and he hoped to see some miracle done by him, because everyone said Jesus did miracles. And so now was his chance, and he had quite a long conversation with Jesus, asking him many questions. But again, in line with the prophecy of Isaiah, Jesus did not answer him a word. Jesus recognized that Herod was an impostor. He had absolutely no authority over him, and Jesus did not answer him. He didn't repudiate him. He didn't spit at him, but he did not answer him a word. Meanwhile, the chief priests and the scribes vehemently accused him. And when they could not break Jesus, Herod allowed his men to mock Jesus with contempt. It was them who put the gorgeous robe on him, and then they sent him back to Pilate, having beaten him, mocked him, and treated him with contempt. Pilate and Herod had been rivals. Herod's father, Herod the Great, had had a great kingdom, but it had been divided, and Pilate was now ruling over part of it, and Herod only had a quarter of the kingdom that Herod the Great had had. So there was a sense of mistrust between them. But they were united when they were confronted with Jesus. Neither of them were prepared to acknowledge him as rightful heir to the land. Although legally neither of them could justify condemning him, yet politically they would not release him. So these two men who had been enemies became friends. Pilate asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" He answered, "It is as you say." And Pilate said to the chief priests and crowd, "I find no fault in this man."